She was 46, a woman ready to take a chance on love again. After years of grieving her late husband, Sandra Willis found hope in an unexpected place. A man she met online. Tariq Kajal, 26, was everything she thought she wanted. Thoughtful, patient, and a devout man of faith. He promised her a love built on mutual respect and patience, one that would honor their beliefs. When they finally arranged to meet in Indonesia, she believed it was the start of something new, a fresh chapter in her life. 8 hours after landing in a small apartment that should have been filled with excitement, Sandra found herself confronting a horrifying truth. What she discovered about Tariq that night, what she saw in a moment of raw terror, would lead to a brutal act that no one could foresee. There, in the most intimate of moments, were maggots crawling over sores in places Sandra never imagined she would see. What did this discovery mean? What had she truly walked into? What made a man go so far? What had she uncovered that led to a death so senseless, so shocking? As the hours ticked by, a life was lost, a lie was exposed, and a twisted secret was revealed. Welcome to Let's Story Crime Department. Thanks for your support. Stay tuned for gripping true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe. The shocking truth about the man she thought she knew was about to be exposed. And Chandra would pay the price for her trust. Sandra Willis had always been a woman of resilience. Born and raised in Georgia, she learned early on the value of hard work, integrity, and independence. As a young girl, she had dreams, big ones. She wanted to make a difference in the world, to create a life that reflected her values and passions. Even at a young age, her strength was apparent to those around her. She was the kind of person who would tackle obstacles head-on, no matter how difficult. Her journey wasn't always easy, though. She grew up in a modest home where her parents instilled in her the importance of perseverance. They taught her that success wasn't defined by material wealth, but by the integrity and effort you put into everything you did. These lessons shaped Sandra's worldview, and she took them with her when she left home to pursue higher education. Sandra's early career was marked by ambition and a deep drive to succeed. She earned her degree in social work, driven by a desire to help others and make a tangible impact in her community. Her first job out of college was working in a local nonprofit, helping families in crisis. She quickly became known for her compassionate nature and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. It wasn't just her job, it was her calling. But her career was only one part of her life. In her late 20s, she met Jason Williams, a man she thought would be her forever. He was kind, steady, and everything she needed at the time. Their love blossomed quickly, and within a few years they were married. Jason was her rock, and together they built a life full of promise. They had 2 children, and Sandra was a dedicated mother, balancing her career with the needs of her family. Life seemed complete. She had everything she ever wanted: a loving husband, beautiful children, and a successful career. But life, as it often does, threw a curveball. Jason was diagnosed with a rare illness in his early 40s, a slow, unrelenting disease that drained him of his energy and eventually his life. Sandra became his caregiver, putting her own dreams on hold to care for the man she loved. The years that followed were some of the hardest she had ever faced. She watched as Jason's health deteriorated, unable to do much but offer comfort as his body gave way to a disease. The emotional toll was immense, but she never complained. She loved him and she believed in honoring their vows. But when he passed away after a long, painful battle, something inside Sandra broke. She was left with the weight of grief and responsibility, not just for herself, but for her children who had lost their father at a young age. For years, Sandra threw herself into her work, dedicating herself to her career and family. But inside there was a void, a longing she couldn't shake. She had built a life around sacrifice. But now she needed something for herself. She needed to feel alive again. Her 40s marked a new chapter of self-discovery. Her children were growing up and her role as a mother was shifting. She found herself wondering what the next phase of her life would look like. It wasn't about running from the past. It was about embracing a future she had put on hold for too long. But the question remained, could she find love again? Could she trust someone with her heart after everything she had been through? Sandra knew she wasn't the same person she had been in her 20s. She had learned hard lessons, faced unimaginable loss, and come out stronger on the other side. But the thought of love, true love, seemed so distant. The world of online dating felt foreign to her, something she hadn't explored since her early years of marriage. Yet she found herself drawn to it, even as she hesitated. She was cautious. She had learned to protect herself, to guard her heart. She wasn't looking for a rebound or a fleeting connection. But in the back of her mind, there was a longing, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find someone who could understand her, someone who could appreciate the woman she had become. That's when Tariq Kajol came into her life. Tariq Kajol was a man who lived in the shadows of his own contradictions. On the surface, he appeared to be a thoughtful, kind, and well-intentioned young man, an ideal match for someone like Sandra Willis, who sought a partner who shared her values, faith, and desire for a meaningful connection. He was 26, a man with a poetic soul, who at first glance seemed to embody the qualities of a perfect match: sensitive, sincere, and deeply spiritual. Born and raised in a small quiet town in Indonesia, Tariq's early life was a mix of modesty and aspiration. He came from a family of modest means, but his parents instilled in him a strong sense of discipline and faith. They were devout Christians, and from an early age, Tariq was taught the importance of piety, morality, and respect for others. He attended church regularly, where he became involved in the youth group. Always the quiet, reserved one who spent more time in prayer than in socializing. It wasn't that he didn't have friends. He did. But Tariq preferred solitude, often spending his time writing poetry or reflecting on the deeper aspects of life. He had a poetic soul, one that sought understanding in places most people never looked. Tariq's early adulthood seemed promising. He moved to Jakarta for university, where he studied literature and theology, driven by his desire to become a poet and a scholar. He was drawn to words, their power to connect, to heal, and to convey profound truths. He spent countless hours immersed in literature, reading classic poets and modern writers alike, with an ever-present desire to craft his own voice, one that would resonate deeply with others. However, beneath the surface of his intellectual pursuits and quiet demeanor, there was a secret, one that Tariq kept hidden from the world and even from himself for many years. After graduation, Tariq found work in a local mortuary transportation service. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady work, and it provided him with the opportunity to pay his bills while continuing his writing. But it was also during this time that something twisted began to take hold of him. The job required him to handle bodies, transporting the deceased from their homes to the mortuary. And for Tariq, it became more than just a profession. It became a dangerous obsession. While handling the bodies of the dead, something inside him shifted. The sterile nature of his job, combined with his growing fascination with death, led to a dark, secret compulsion. He began to develop an obsession with corpses and started sleeping with them, a fetish that he struggled to control. The more he worked in the mortuary, the more his mind was consumed by a desire that he couldn't share with anyone, not even himself. Tariq, in his own quiet desperation, tried to suppress these feelings, but they festered. His inability to reconcile his religious values with his desires led him to spiral further into isolation. In a twisted way, Tariq believed that the healing power of love could redeem him. He convinced himself that if he could find someone who truly understood him, someone who could accept his flaws, perhaps he could be freed from the darkness that seemed to define his existence. Tariq, in his own quiet desperation, tried to suppress these feelings, but they festered. His inability to reconcile his religious values with his desires led him to spiral further into isolation. In a twisted way, Tariq believed that the healing power of love could redeem him. He convinced himself that if he could find someone who truly understood him, someone who could accept his flaws, perhaps he could be freed from the darkness that seemed to define his existence. This, he thought, was the reason he had joined Christian singles groups online, to find a woman who could offer him salvation, love, and acceptance. And that's where Chandra came into the picture. When he found her profile on the Facebook group for Christian singles, Tariq felt an immediate connection. Her strength, her faith, her experience, everything about her seemed like the missing piece he had longed for. She was mature, grounded, and full of life. Tariq admired her confidence, the way she carried herself, and the way she spoke about her faith. It wasn't just a physical attraction. It was a connection that felt spiritual to him. She was the kind of woman who could save him, who could help him overcome the darkness that had plagued him for years. In the weeks that followed, Sandra's connection with Tariq deepened in ways she had never anticipated. Their conversations began as light-hearted exchanges. Initially just two people sharing small snippets of their lives, their dreams, their hopes. But it didn't take long before they began to open up to each other in ways neither had expected. Tariq was a man of faith, and his beliefs permeated every part of their conversations. He would send her messages filled with scripture, reminders of God's love, and words of encouragement. He spoke about their shared belief that God had a plan for their lives, that their connection wasn't just coincidental, but divinely orchestrated. His words didn't just promise love. They promised a spiritual partnership, one built on a foundation of trust, respect, and patience. Tariq's commitment to waiting until marriage resonated deeply with Sandra. In a world where relationships often moved too fast, where commitment was sometimes fleeting, Tariq's patience felt like a rare gift. There was no pressure, no rush, just the promise of taking their time, building something meaningful and lasting. His words didn't just promise love. They promised a spiritual partnership, one built on a foundation of trust, respect, and patience. Tariq's commitment to waiting until marriage resonated deeply with Sandra. In a world where relationships often moved too fast, where commitment was sometimes fleeting, Tariq's patience felt like a rare gift. There was no pressure, no rush, just the promise of taking their time, building something meaningful and lasting. He spoke of the sacredness of marriage, of honoring one another before God. And Sandra, having been through the heartache of a lost marriage, found solace in his approach. The way he respected her boundaries, the way he understood her hesitation, made her believe in him. It was rare to find someone who not only understood her faith, but also respected it to the core. He didn't just want her body, he wanted her heart, her soul. And that was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. With each passing day, she felt more connected to him, not just emotionally, but spiritually. They prayed together over the phone, spoke of their hopes for the future, and shared their deepest fears. Felt like a slow, steady burn, unhurried and genuine. There was no rushing, no urgency. It was just the two of them drawn together by something greater than themselves. Their online chats became the rhythm of her days. She would wake up in the morning to a message from him, a scripture or a kind word to start her day. Throughout the day, they would exchange thoughts on faith, life, and their growing bond. They talked about everything about the past, their families, their goals. There were no barriers, no walls between them. In Tariq, Sandra felt like she had finally found someone who understood her in a way no one else had. He wasn't just filling the space of loneliness. He was making her feel seen again. And yet, as her feelings for him grew stronger, so did her doubts. Why had he chosen to live in Indonesia? What was his life like there really? What had led him to this moment to her? In their conversations, he was careful with his words, but there were still gaps in his story. The conversations about their future were beautiful, but there were still questions she hadn't asked, things she hadn't fully understood about him. Small details that didn't quite add up, but ones she chose to overlook. After all, he was patient. He was kind. He was everything she had hoped for. Surely those small gaps were just the result of distance, of not knowing each other fully yet. She began to share more about herself too, opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She spoke about her late husband, the pain of losing him, the joy of raising her children and her career. She told him about her life in Georgia, the beauty of the simple moments, and the challenges she faced. Tarek listened with a quiet intensity, always attentive, always understanding. She trusted him. Maybe it was because his words seemed so sincere. Maybe it was because he truly seemed to be someone who valued her, not just for what she could give but for who she was. Yet, deep down, a small part of her remained guarded. A woman who had endured so much in her life, who had learned the hard way not to trust too quickly, couldn't entirely let go of her skepticism. Tarek was perfect on paper, perhaps too perfect. She hadn't seen him in person yet, hadn't touched the words he spoke, only felt them through the screen. Was he who he said he was? Could she trust that the man she was falling for online was the same man she would meet in person? Sandra's decision to board a flight across the world wasn't made lightly. At 46, she had learned the value of caution, of taking calculated risks, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But something about Tarek, something in the way he spoke, the way he made her feel seen, had inspired a level of trust she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It wasn't just the long-distance relationship that pulled her in. It was the promise of something real. After years of grieving her late husband, after months of quietly questioning if she'd ever find someone who could match her soul, here was a man who seemed to offer her everything she had been missing. He was different from the men she had met in the past. Patient, sincere, and devoted to his faith. And above all, he respected her boundaries, never rushing her, always valuing her for who she was, not just what she could give. So she made the decision. She would leave her stable life, her home and her children, and fly over 9,000 m to Jakarta, Indonesia, to meet Tarek in person. And as the flight drew nearer, Sandra's thoughts began to swirl. What if this wasn't the dream she hoped for? What if the man she had shared her heart with wasn't what he seemed? There were no answers to these questions, only a series of uncertainties she chose to leave behind as she boarded that plane. November 9, 2024. The day Sandra left for Jakarta was a quiet one, filled with a mix of excitement and quiet apprehension. She had been planning it for weeks, but as the day finally arrived, the weight of her decision hit her in a way she hadn't expected. The morning began with the familiar hum of routine. She woke up early before the sun had fully risen, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. She'd spent the night packing and repacking, making sure every item in her suitcase was just right. The clothes were casual but thoughtful, the shoes comfortable but stylish. She even packed a few things she knew would bring her comfort during the long flight. Her favorite book, a scarf her late husband had once given her, and of course her Bible. It was a grounding presence, something that had carried her through the hardest moments of her life. When the plane touched down in Jakarta, Sandra's excitement was palpable. She felt the weight of anticipation in her chest. She was about to meet the man who had captured her heart. What would it be like? Would the reality live up to the dream they had built? And yet, even as her feet touched the ground in a city so far from everything she knew, there was an unspoken tension in the air, a feeling she couldn't quite place. Could a relationship built on such faith withstand the terrifying truth Tarek had kept hidden? The man who promised patience, respect, and a love rooted in God had yet to reveal his deepest secret. The part of him he had concealed so carefully behind his words. What would happen when that truth finally emerged? Would their connection survive the revelation? And what cost would Sandra pay for believing in a love that, for all its promises, was built on a foundation of deceit? As Sandra stepped off the plane and into the crowded, humid streets of Jakarta, her heart raced with excitement and anticipation. The journey had felt long, too long. But now the moment had finally come. She was about to meet the man who had filled her thoughts for months. The man who had promised her a future built on love and faith. When she saw him standing at the airport holding a sign with her name, something shifted inside her. Tarek, the man she had imagined for so long. His nervous smile, the way he looked at her, it was everything she had hoped for. In that instant, her doubts melted away. This was real. He was real. They embraced warmly, his arms wrapping around her as if he had been waiting for this moment just as long. It felt genuine, the kind of hug that made her feel safe, that made her believe the leap she had taken was worth it. Tarek, the man she had imagined for so long. His nervous smile, the way he looked at her, it was everything she had hoped for. In that instant, her doubts melted away. This was real. He was real. They embraced warmly, his arms wrapping around her as if he had been waiting for this moment just as long. It felt genuine, the kind of hug that made her feel safe, that made her believe the leap she had taken was worth it. He was as handsome as his pictures, his eyes just as deep and inviting. He spoke softly, asking about her flight, how she had been, what she thought of the city. There was a gentle excitement in his voice, the kind that spoke of something new, something thrilling on the horizon. But there was something beneath his enthusiasm, something that caught her attention, though she couldn't put a finger on it at first. It was his nervousness, the way he seemed almost too eager to please, the way his hands shook just slightly as he reached to take her suitcase. She brushed it off. After all, they had never met before. She was nervous too. He guided her through the airport, leading her to a car that would take them to the apartment he had arranged for them. Sandra had been under the impression they would be staying at a hotel, a place more familiar, more neutral. Instead, Tarek had chosen a modest apartment tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was cozy, not too large but comfortable enough. Kindly subscribe. Story by Sena for part 2. Like and comment your thought on a distance relationship as we bring the next part. Thank you.